Right, so welcome Deirdre Fay to Yoga Chats. I'm really pleased you took the time to come. Deirdre has written a number of books on embodied yoga. I think what's the last title of your book? Embodying Yourself?
Safely Embodied?
Yeah.
The last one. And then the one before is, I can't believe I forgot.
Well, at least you forgot it, not me.
Yoga and Meditation for Trauma Recovery. How could I forget?
You write the whole book, you forget the title.
The labor of the damn thing.
Yeah, and the title as well. So, I mean, did you just, as a brief introduction to listeners that don't know your work, obviously it's a lot to do with using yoga for situations where people have been involved in trauma and suffering and, embodying oneself, so this is a very interesting territory to me, particularly these days. And I wonder if you could just give an overview of how you came on, to it in the first place. Yeah, just as a start.
Well, let's start with where we all start, our own history.
Yes, exactly.
I was actually living in a yoga ashram. This would have been in the 80s, late 80s. And it was during that time of doing a lot of yoga and meditation that my own trauma history came up and whacked me upside the head. I had no idea. Maybe I didn't have a concept about it, but for whatever reason, I didn't have an idea that I had a history. And I really wondered why I was able to do a lot of yoga and meditation before. I was training for triathlons before. And then after, it felt like a demarcation line. It felt like I couldn't. I felt like I was crawling and couldn't
you mentioned that in your book, and it's curious to come up on in the book all of a sudden like that. And I mean, you don't explain that much whys or wherefores of how that arose, or did you see signs of something coming up as you were practicing? Or
I think, well, one of the things I've begun to see is that sometimes trauma seeps into our awareness. Sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes there's like a cataclysmic kind of thing. As I look back, I think yoga and meditation softened my defenses so that it came through. And I was at the time doing a lot of teaching at the ashram and training in a lot of different modalities. So I think I just probably got more educated. And then when the crack opened, it was during a workshop. It was just like...
Right, so it was just one moment.
For me, it was just one moment.
That's incredible.
And then, I don't know how many years of putting myself back together. And I was like, how come I could do it and I can't? And then I was like determined, okay, what do I need to do? How do I actually use the principles of yoga and meditation, these ancient wisdom traditions, the Sufi teachings that I was so immersed in, to do it? And it was... I don't know that there was a clear path, but I was just really determined to do that. And that was just when trauma treatment was beginning to be developed. And I had the good fortune to be introduced to Bessel van der Kolk, who heard about the work I was doing. He was just beginning to get involved in body stuff. So when I graduated from getting my master's degree, he invited me to join his team. And I was there, and he wanted me to lead a group, teach some of these things. And so that was the beginnings of the Become Safe Embodied. And I had told you before we started recording that when I was getting my training, I was working at a mental hospital, one of the largest mental hospitals in the United States at that time. And they had heard that I had lived in an ashram, and somebody had done some work there and asked me to come teach the dissociative unit at night, not getting paid, but just to help out. And so I did, because I was really curious and I wanted to give back. I wanted to see, how do I take what I know and help? And so that was really the beginning, and then developing it further with Bessel's work. And then my colleague, Janina Fisher, who's become quite well known, she and I shared an office. And she said, well, gosh, all my clients I sent you are getting better faster. What are you doing? And so she came, and she actually started teaching the course with me. So we, at one point, had like multiple years of people working with us over 12 weeks, and then it was 24 weeks, and then they wanted another year because they needed those concrete things.
Yeah. I mean, as we were saying before, yoga is great for all people, but for people, like you, like many of us, like me, have suffered trauma. I mean, I could talk my way around anything. I went to therapists from the age of, honestly, to be patently honest, I was in therapy since the age of 10 years old, right? So I was talking for all these years to all these different people, and it didn't make any bloody difference. I could seem like I could say all the stuff. I could, if it's really, I mean, I can emote quite well, but nothing changed, until and even my taekwondo, I did the football. Obviously, when you're in England, you do football, nothing, but they got rid of a bit of anxiety and tension, but it was only the actual yoga that's something, the embodiment, but I'm still to this day trying to understand why it feels different, I'd
be very curious to hear, Adam, what happened when so you were doing mostly asana, or were you doing a whole practice?
No. I mean, I was at university. I was pretty much an alcoholic. And I knew that something had to change, and nothing was working with the talking therapies, and I was on antidepressants, and I was in a bad way, and I thought maybe Tai Chi, but Tai Chi kind of conflicted with a drinking night, actually, at university. So I ended up thinking, well, yoga is a day that I'm not actually, going out on the piss with the friends, so I'll try that, and from the, and I suppose I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't really optimistic. But when I sat on the mat in the class, something really happened, and from that day on, every morning I got up, and before I had my first cigarette and drink, which was 11 o'clock at least, I would have a drink, I would just practice yoga for a half an hour, or at least 15 minutes at the start, maybe, what I remember from the class, and it just gradually chipped away at everything, just very, very quickly. It chipped away, but I don't really understand why. And that's, I suppose, what I'm still circling around with these kind of chats, is to try to say, well, what's the difference, I suppose, before I carry on rambling, what's the difference between the way you did yoga before, Deirdre, and when you used it for trauma, and when you used it for trauma on yourself and with other people? Was there an essence that you could say in a way that you felt that that's such a good question. I was thinking, before you directed the question at me, I was thinking about with you that one of the things that I find most helpful for people as they are really starting to use yoga is concentration. To be able to train the mind to go where you want it to go versus where you're rambling away at. So if we think about it, the neurobiologically, we're embedded mental, emotional, physical sensory patterns in our body, and they're just going to keep going that way. The neurons keep firing that way until we harness that and redirect it, which is really yoga. And so in yoga, what we're trying to do is say, okay, instead of going that way, let's pull it back, pratyahara, let's withdraw the senses and reorient it. And so when you're holding a posture and your body starts shaking and you want to give up, and you keep just staying there, and you're just relaxing the body, you're holding the posture, breathing into it, you're dropping out of the mind, which says, I'm going to die, this is bad, and just stay with it, breathe. What we're allowing to do is let the energy rise, crest, and fall. And that begins to shift a little bit. And what I've come to in the frame I have around it now is that prana is designed, its purpose, its sole purpose, is to return us back to ourselves. If you think about yoga in the largest sense is about union. It's about being connected, no separation. But we have separated ourselves, and trauma interrupts that. We do feel like there's something wrong, and we blame and judge and make wrong out there and ourselves. But prana is saying, you know what, those are just some scars. Those are some scars on your consciousness. And prana is saying, I'm just going to come through, honey, and I'm just going to clean those some scars out so that you're free. And we're
okay, but wait, this hurts. This is hard. What are you doing to me? And we tighten up around it. We get more defensive and tight. But prana is really, if we go with the flow of it, prana is coming through and saying, it's okay. It's okay. This is hard, but just let go. Let it go. And that's the practice of surrender. That's the practice that comes from concentrating so often that you can let the energy move through.
Yeah. But it's also concentrating. I think when you're speaking, I mean, it kind of makes me think it's concentration on the body that was different, right? Because I was good at concentrating on the mental stuff, right? Like I was still able to function as quite a good and high grade student, right? So the mental faculties were good, but the body was a place that I was absolutely petrified to be. So being in the mind was a good way to avoid the body. But what it was is in the yoga class.
I'm going to draw you something. Keep going.
Yeah, I felt safe. I felt safe to be on my mat, and I felt safe to allow any experience to come up and that it wouldn't overwhelm me. But I think in the daytime, I didn't have that space. An experience might come up and I wouldn't be able to deal with it because I didn't feel safe in the body. But in the yoga class, I did.
So what allowed you, in the yoga class, to feel safe?
That's a good question. Concentration. Yeah, I mean, without going into cliche, it's the concentration on the body. I always felt like the mind was kind of encased in the body. So instead of the mind, it's often felt like, I remember, days of having quite bad trouble with mental health, that my mind was kind of flying to pieces, like it was flying every direction, and I couldn't hold it in. I couldn't hold it in. And then when the mind kind of coming back into the body and being kind of contained in the vessel of the body. So the vessel of the body being like a mandala in a way that allows the mind to be held and supported in the kind of sacred geometry of the body. That's not too poetic.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say two things. I'm going to do a little drawing, so let's see if it shows up on the screen. So what we know is from when we're born to about 3 in here, we experience the world, what we apprehend the world. It's all experience. A little child, before their brain develops, is like, breeze, sun, right? They're out there experiencing. And not even often, but in this age, there's a sense of me and the world are fused versus me as separate. But what tends to happen as our brain develops is we separate from that. So from this age on, our brain starts developing cognitively. Now I'm thinking about the experience rather than just apprehending. And our world, our Western world, is very much prone to that. You think about it. I am my brain, I'm not my being. And so here I am, when something happens and I'm trundling along doing my thing, I am going to think about it, but I might not be experiencing it, especially if there's big, tough things going on. And so if we had good enough caring in these early age, somebody would be like, oh, wow, that's so intense, or that's so big, or that's such, would empathize, attune to us, help us make sense of this world. If we didn't get it, and the research is 3 out of 4 of us didn't get that, then we have to learn I call this self-attunement. I need to be able to stay inside my body here and connect with my experience, attune to myself, instead of asking the world to do that for me. So that's one important thing. And then another thing that I'd say about that is that if we think that everything in life is to rise, crest, and fall, this word in here, it's also true on the inverse. So if I'm going down, if we think about the koshas, the 5 layers of the body, when we're going into despair and into distress, I have to know what my thoughts are. I have to know what my feelings are. I have to know what my sensations in my body are. I have to know who I am psychologically. We think about, so I need to know my physical body, the physical body, the koshas, the energetic, the prana body. I need to know that. I need to know my thoughts and feelings, my psychological self. Those are the first three bodies of the koshas, right? In here. That's what has to be more aware of. Now, when I get to this place, this is where the third body, the discrimination, comes in. Wisdom begins to develop. I've been through the shitstorm. Now what's happening? How can I make sense of it? And then I can begin to have bliss body over here. And bliss may be more contentment. It may be equilibrium. It may just be balance, not, ecstatic states even. But there's really different stages of healing. And this stage, this entry into the darkness of our history, where we get pulled into the stories, we get trapped by our psychological stuff, that's where we need really these more basic skills. And this is where the Becoming Safe and Embodied skills do a great job of putting it together. Internal family systems helps with the psychological self.
Yeah, why don't you speak a little bit about those skills? Because I think, the idea of becoming, in tune to oneself is kind of begs the question, doesn't it? It's like, okay, there's all this stuff there, and now just attune to it. It's like, all right. Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, just before you start on that, I think the important thing to recognise is the yoga at a point wasn't enough for me either. It's like you reach a ceiling where you've got asana practice and it's done a lot, but then you have to involve that into some framework that will kind of organise the rest of the day for you and help you dovetail into other modalities as well, which you very nicely do in the book.
Well, we have to, because in order to put ourselves together again, we have to do it wholeheartedly. We're not a mechanical thing. I can't just say, I'm going to work on one thing. I'm going to work on my nervous system, and that's going to be it. No, we have to develop a self. And this is where the ancient practices are so helpful. They literally were about creating a character, a good character, by all the practice of the riverbanks, the yamas and niyamas, whatever it might be, whatever the tradition might hold, is all about creating a good enough character, a structure inside to be able to hold it. But we don't have that so much in our world. We don't really know how to do that. I don't think good enough. And so when we start putting those pieces together, like one of the first things we do in the Becoming Safely Embodied skills is, what is a thought, what is a feeling, and what is a body sensation? Because most of it, we're doing shorthand, we're like clumping it all together, and we're running with it. But one of the dilemmas is, if we look at sensations in the body, they can be grouped together differently to have a different experience. And I use the example of anxiety versus excitement. If we take those basic, tiny, foundational sensations, we can choose how to orient them, so that if I say I'm anxious or depressed or whatever it is, that's made of tiny little moments. Well, let's think it through. Anxiety is, what is it? It might be a rattling. It might be a quaking. It might be fast breathing, right? All these kind of things and so their heart rate increasing, butterflies in the stomach, there might be all these kind of things. Now, what's the difference between anxiety and, let's put it over here, excitement? Well, when we break this apart in our workshops, so I want to make sure it gets on your screen here.
I can see.
It's the same things. Same things. When we're excited, we might be rattled, quaking, faster breathing, heart rate, dry mouth, all those things. So what is it that has us go here versus here? That really is the patterned response. If I lived with and patterned my response this way, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get within 10 feet of any of these experiences, and I'm going to go boom right here. I'm going to take the breath and the pause and the pratyahara withdrawing to see, like, okay, maybe I'm excited. But when we just create this little wedge in here, which is part of what yoga does, it stops us from thinking about and going with the fast-moving thoughts and lets us drop underneath it, pausing. We're focusing so much on what's going on, like I got to hold this posture, I'm still breathing, okay, I'm going to relax, I'm like this, or like that I'm taking a break from the patterned response leading me here. Lets my body have some, okay, what else might be there? And what I believe, and I think the practices prove us all that way, is when we take that pause, what we begin to drop into the well of our own knowing, the well of beingness. And that refreshes us and starts bringing us in a new direction. It says, okay, you don't have to go there. There's another way. But we don't know how to, we don't have the, it's so ephemeral in many ways, how to really land in it. And we discount it. We say, oh, I felt good for a few moments. It can't be real, really. This pain and agony is real. That's what's real. And so we just keep spinning in that cycle rather than, and what yoga does, it says, if you keep a consistent practice, you're going to pause. You're going to pause.
Yeah. Also kind of like space around your emotional state, isn't it? Just to reconsider. So rather than kind of jumping on the like a label, okay, this means this, rather it's just like you're in a certain space where you can look again and relabel, and remake again. I think that's one thing that I've definitely found. The yoga broke the cycle of I'm depressed now and I'll be depressed tomorrow. So you just kind of get this kind of constant cycle. You kind of can't. There's a circuit breaker in there with yoga. It's like now there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to reassess if that feeling still does mean this, or right, Yeah.
And the more we do that, the more we can no longer be at the whim of those old pattern responses, but we get to say, okay, how do I want to be? Who do I want to be given this circumstance that I'm in? And that's the choice.
What about the breath? More practically speaking, you speak a lot about the breath in your book, and that I like the idea of the sip breath, right? And a lot of people become panicked when getting to the breath, actually, when it's, we always say, breathe and it will calm you down, but often the instruction to breathe actually can do the opposite to people. It can really overwhelm them and can actually trigger them, Right. Do you want to speak a little bit about breath?
Breath is an affect regulator. So, and when I was, when people started working in the body decades ago, they would say, take a deep breath. Like, relax and breathe. Yeah. But what you can do is just like a little sip of a breath. We're already breathing anyway. This is yoga teacher. They're already breathing. How do I just... And then using kumpak. I think that is so helpful. And to train yourself, what happens if I hold at the bottom of the inhalation? What happens if I softly hold it at the top of the inhalation? And what feels better to me? Now we know theoretically that the top of the inhalation, if we hold the breath gently, it's going to harness the anxious breath. But you get to choose. You get to see what you get to explore your body. Your inner wisdom directing you.
Yeah, I actually remember having that instruction from a therapist, like try holding your breath on the exhale, and it did help a bit, because suddenly the mind does tend to slow down if you're having a kind of an anxiety attack or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. What about meditation? Where do you put that in terms of how does that relate to the yoga? You went and did a lot of training in meditation, and you never told me what particular lineage you were training in.
Well, first, it was very much with the centering prayer with Christians. One of my early spiritual directors was this incredible nun who taught me centering prayer. Did a lot of retreats there. And then it was in the Thai tradition, in the Insight Meditation Society. Went there for many years and practiced.
Right.
But then, what I think we're finding out is just sitting still is not necessarily the best thing for all of us. And the difference between people who practice yoga and who are on a yogic meditation retreat is there's often chanting, right? And what is chanting? Chanting is another form of meditation. It's just doing the same thing over and over and training ourselves in that melodicness. And that brings us more to a blissful state. But we also know that if you have a history of trauma, a blissful state might scare the poopies out of you. So it's about being really skillful in it. But we do know that for people to sit still for extended period of times can help with good training. But it also, that can open something up. When I did my master's study, I researched, I forget how many people who'd been in long-term meditation practices, extended, living in retreat settings, living and practicing for hours a day, and talking to them about what they did when their trauma history came up. And they had to adjust. They couldn't just sit still. They had to do yoga. They had to go for a walk. They had to do some pranayama. They had to do something to shift, because just sitting still brings a lot up. We know with concentration, with it, whether it's chanting or something else, it's going to open up those bliss states, which are going to be hard to bear. But if you're just doing Vipassana and just doing insight, you're going to train yourself to be able to let everything come up and pass through. But then the next will come up and it will pass through. And then at some point, the next layer will come up and it'll be too hard to bear. But you've trained yourself to stay with it, that you're going to get rattled. And we know that people on those retreats at times can get really fragmented. Not right or wrong, it's just what happens. It probably is what happened to me when I did it. Because I can train myself to just stay with something and name it and let it move, but it isn't always a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting idea of embodiment, isn't it? Because when does embodiment become dwelling, and when does embodiment have a fresher kind of movement around it, right? Because I mean, certainly you can, as I would mention with the talking therapies, I very much embodied my history, but I think I crystallized it further.
Say more. What do you mean?
I think that when you feel something and you embody it, it seems like a doorway, like a revolving doorway. You can go further into it, it can become more you, or you can kind of embody it, and somehow, between the lines, I don't know how you do it. Can dissipate. You can embody it, and it can be allowed to pass through. But I think coming back to oneself and embodying, we're afraid to do that because we feel that we might be stuck there.
Right. And that,
so when is embodying dwelling, and when is embodying kind of coming back to allow out, or And,
it's such a great question. I'm going to just sit with that for a moment, because we know from yoga that if we sit with ourselves, we're connected inside and outside. So what has that break happen? It's still a psychological development. So what is it and how, and I don't know that I have an answer right here, is how do we develop that capacity to dwell in our true nature instead of just staying with some of those fear-based patterns, the threat patterns that are there, and the protections. And I don't know. I think that's what happens when we've done a certain amount of work. That at some point, when we begin to crest up again, and that discernment and wisdom develops, that's where we begin to see, okay, how do I stay attuned inside? How do I align my heart, my soul, my purpose in life with all that's meant to be? And how do I learn to flow with that and amplify this with that and be at one? There's that connection internally, the vertical axis connected to spirit and to the earth, my heart at the center, flowing out my heart into the world. And that's where that unity then gets. But it's a wisdom tradition. It's a wisdom path.
Yeah, I think there's a question of when you see something and when you see it, then what, right? I mean, how do you let that go or reintegrate it, right?
Tell me what you mean. There's something important there.
Well, something comes up, whether it's shame or, or an experience of the past or, something that you would rather not be or feel. And you can see it clearly. But then the $1 million question is, how the fuck do you let it go? I mean, I'm still, and I'm still asking that question, to like today, to be patently honest, And I think that if I was to...
And you can see what you think about it.
All right, okay. Then I'll give you my idea.
Do you want to start with yours?
No, my the only possibility I have with it is when the practice goes outward, when you interact and interrelate yourself, like you talk about the heart connection with other people, and then something dissipates. It's like the light that was reflecting back on you and kind of combusting. It's like a self-combustion is somehow, in the focus, because there's pain in all of us. There's a trauma body in all of us, regardless of the best parenting, right? And the only way I think to mitigate these circumstances is to turn it outwards and to allow it to be dissipated with others in the world, right? Otherwise, there is just dwelling on one's own pain, right? When you see that something, when you realise that there's others there that are also have the pain, and you can really empathise with that, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but that's really helped me.
Not at all.
It's really that's
right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I got from attachment research is this idea, and it really is yoga. It's the integration of yoga. Is this idea of an attachment mirror, of life as an attachment. Like when I lived in the ashram, we would say everything's a mirror, and it's true, So if life is mirroring back pain and suffering, if life is mirroring back, I'm a terrible person, I'm no good, I'm stupid, I'm wrong, I'm going to get beat up, whatever it might be, I have to, my discernment point is that the world I want to look at? Is that harmonious with what I believe in every aspect of my being? Or do I want to look in a different point of view? And that's where I came up with this idea of a transformational model, which is basically everything that upsets me, that I don't like, that I complain about. In attachment theory, we think of that as a protest. I'm protesting that I didn't get my needs met. My needs for safety, security, belongingness, my needs for reassurance and comfort, my need for being calmed and soothed in my body, my need to be delighted in and to know that I'm special and unique, to be guided and mentored, to know how to deal with conflict, and then to be able to how to not take life personally. These are basic needs that happen, that come with good enough parenting. But what happens is I'm protesting in my world. I'm so upset. It should be different. What inside my body, what inside your body knows it should be different? That's what we need to listen to. That's the inner wisdom. It's like, no, I don't like this. It's not fair. Okay, listen. But we don't know how to turn towards something new because it's so ingrained in us. It's so imprinted.
Also, there's a lack of trust in the listening, isn't there? And I think increasingly so when everything is kind of, farmed out to the experts and the authorities.
Right, exactly.
You need one for everything now. Even to brush your own teeth, you need someone to tell you how to do it, right, and give you the right, right toothpaste, right?
Exactly.
The empowerment of the individual definitely isn't where we're currently going in the society. Let's put it that way.
Well, right? That's why you and I have an important voice to bring into the world, because having your own, my wisdom, it's like, how do I listen to my own guidance that says, go to the ashram, leave the ashram, go to
and trust your own guide. Yeah, trust your. Yeah.
Leave the U.S., go to France. You know why? What in there is saying go? Trusting that. Very hard. Very hard to do. But I think what's beginning to happen is people are starting to turn toward that. Their hunger for that. I know I certainly did and do.
And also trust you can take the consequences, right? You know, if it doesn't, right? Like trust you're able to have some kind of method or structure in your mind and your body to allow that, you know, if things don't go exactly, you know, that you will be able to cope, right?
And that's, I think that's what we're teaching and coaching people on, how to have a steady, solid, secure self inside that can be with whatever life throws at you, because it will throw the next thing at you. So how do I stay from that place?
Yeah, and if you don't believe that you can cope with the next thing, then you're in a constant state of anxiety. You're kind of waiting, you know, for that next thing because you feel like, you know, whatever it is, can't cope, you know. And I've definitely been there. What about there's a part in your book where you talk about going to you're driving to a meditation retreat and you stop in New York and your car gets broken into and everything gets taken, right? The whole thing's smashed up, and then you drive to the retreat anyway. And I felt that's just a really poignant part of the book. Would you and what you said to yourself at that time? Do you want to explain that for the listeners?
Well, I don't remember what I said in the book. I can't believe I actually put it.
Well, you know, I think it was a question of embodying that. What struck me was that you were having experience of, which is a lot coming up. Obviously, all your, you know, I don't know all your worldly positions, but a lot of, you know, and you're going off to this retreat anyways, and you
teach actually.
Yeah, I assume you arrived there right teaching, and arrived there with nothing, you know, and you know, and you're having these strong kind of, let's say, negative experiences in your body, you know, and. You said to yourself something like, well, I'm feeling like this, and I don't know, I'm feeling like this, and it's okay, or you know, or all will be well, or something like that. And I kind of really liked it that there was an experience of owning the experience, you know, and say, well, this is the actual feeling that's happening. I'm not denying that either, not painting a glossy veneer of it, you know, which is also, I think, what people do these days. Well, everything's awesome, you know, it's like, you know, like just to tell yourself in a positive affirmation that way, just kind of buries the shit deeper in a way, doesn't it? It's like, you know, first you have to just accept that the things aren't, you know, they're not ideal, right? But then it's like, you know, there's another message that can be kind of inserted in there. I think that's the gist of.
You got it completely, because after I was teaching, I then went to a meditation retreat. I was a metta, a loving kindness retreat, and I remember thinking, one of the phrases is "May I be happy," and I was being on the retreat, and I was like, "Oh, I'm not happy. I'm not happy." So that's where I started playing with. Okay, I'm not happy. And I wish for myself to be happy. This really sucks. And may I live a life of ease. You know, it's like, okay, holding the reality. And that's the power of, and I got so clearly.
Yeah.
Have both experience. Again, that's yoga, right? And now I teach this whole, this idea of the Angel and Mudra, where you hold something softly between your hands. It's like, okay, you put one in one hand, one in the other. What happens if you are attending and guiding and you integrate that too in front of your heart? That's the third higher synthesis here in your heart, is holding these two opposites, that there can be more.
We've talked a little bit about John Bowlby's work and the attachment theory as well. I mean, I still don't know that much about it, but I'm very intrigued to hear a little bit more about it. Do you think you could say something about it?
Well, his work was highly influential to me. And literally, I remember going to a workshop and sitting in the back of the room and thinking, you know, just doing it for my CEs but then it was like, oh my God, this is the missing piece. This is why trauma doesn't resolve, because we knew enough at that point that trauma should be clearing, but it wasn't for many, many people. And it really is these embedded attachment issues. So attachment theory is all about the relationships we have early on, that if they're not, if they don't become secure over time, what happens is we maintain those same patterns, those early imprints, relational imprints, for the rest of our lives. And the research was utterly compelling about that. If we don't interrupt and change that pattern, 77% of us will maintain that insecure pattern into our life. That's unbelievable. My mentor, Dan Brown, who we co-wrote the book Attachment Disturbances in Adults with a group, the small group that we'd worked together for 13 years, what we saw in that, he had done an earlier research around what happens in orphanages. Why do people get better and why do people have a harder time getting better? And the fundamental difference was really if somebody knew that they were cared about, even if they were put into an orphanage, even if they were abandoned. If people didn't feel cared for, didn't know at some level of their being they were loved or valued or important to somebody, those were the people that had these intractable conditions that made it so difficult to get better. And we know that from a lot of the adoption stuff the research that goes on around adoptions now as well. So getting all that was very clear. And I was like, oh my God, this is yoga. This is yoga, right? Love is the piece that we all need and love and want. And so if an infant, somebody 0 to 3, doesn't get loved in that way, they're not going to be able to attain their state of connection and union. And this just, what the wisdom traditions knew so early on, they knew it almost intuitively, but then the attachment research really grounded it in research.
I think it strikes me that if you haven't got that safe attachment when you're young, then there's a lot of work to do using the yoga to try and rescale those models in adulthood. And again, most of the work a lot of the work in yoga, vis-a-vis Patanjali sutras, etc., is on the how to relate to other people, right?
Right.
And it's off the mat, not as opposed to on the mat, unfortunately, because that's the harder work, really. I wanted just to finally ask you about teaching. A lot of people are very afraid to teach, increasingly give certain cues these days, or teach altogether due to possibly triggering people in the class, right? There's this word triggering being bandied around. When I interviewed Bessel, he was actually very refreshing about it and said, look, obviously you don't want to trigger people, but you can't treat people with kid gloves either, right? And he was explicit in saying you need to touch people. People need to be touched and help. You don't. But I think now there's this over preciousness with yoga. It's got a little bit involved in trauma, and it's like, well, no, you can't say anything, you can't do anything, you might trigger someone. What? Do you have any advice for yoga teachers and how to kind of
a great question.
Straddle this? Yeah.
What I've come to is you're going to get triggered. I'm going to get triggered. We get triggered. But who do I want to be given the fact that I'm triggered? And this is where and your yoga teachers can certainly use this. It's I call it the parallel lives that's in my book. It's all about you're in the yoga class room now, right? You're in the studio now. This is this current year. And then triggering happens down here. The reason we get triggered is because we haven't been able to let it rise, crest, and fall in this moment. If everything rise, crest, and fall in this moment as an adult, I'm going to be able to metabolize it and move on. But this is where it's unmetabolized. So what happens, I'm in the yoga studio, I'm walking down the street, I'm whatever. This gets activated and it comes into this moment as if it's now, but it's not. This is what's undigested. So I need to be able to be here, and really learn how to bring my heart into relationship with this without being caught in it. I need to stay here and not go here. And that's the practice. And you can use that at any moment and anywhere. It's like, okay, what I tend to do with people say, you're here in 2022, right now. And you can see people start clearing, and they may need to separate. Like the facts are right now, you're here in the yoga studio. The fact is you're right here. What color are the walls? What color is the ground? Who am I? Am I a safe person? I'm not that person that's triggering you. I'm here, right here in this moment. And it's like another concentration practice. I'm here, not there. And when I begin to get that, some part of me got triggered, but I'm not triggered. I'm right here in the room. My body is here. Is anything bad happening right now? Well, you touched me. You touched me. Yes, I touched you. I touched you, and you're there. And you begin to the window of tolerance grows, the activation decreases, because the reality is they're moving into reality, which is right here in the moment with you, not whatever is triggering you in the past.
I think it puts a lot of autonomy on the individual, though, having the experience, right? And I think that the current situation is that the autonomy is taken off the individual completely, right? And the onus is completely on the teacher as the controller of this possibility of triggering, right? And, and the student is completely, they're not to be,
We do a lot in our trainings about how do you create safety and what is safety. But some of that safety is you're there. How do you want to be given this situation? If you're getting activated, maybe you need to pause, go to the bathroom, just breathe, settle yourself. You're here in this moment. Look around the room. You're ready. There's things you can do to land yourself in, but it's not triggering. Is not somebody else's, I was going to say, fault, but there are instances where people do intrude on us, but you get to say no. And we know from the research then when we say no, when we stop somebody hurting us, then we actually have more authority and connection to ourselves. So it's not clear cut, but what is true is what is happening in this moment is safe. Now it gets messy because we get gaslit. People are not clean and clear. People get muddied up. Teachers, we're not all clean. So. But if somebody's triggered by something that I'm doing, as a teacher, how do I make it safe for them to say, wow, that's really triggering? Say, okay, so what do you need right now? What do you need right now? Well, I need to yell at you and tell you you're a schmuck. Okay, but not right now in the context of this yoga class. But afterwards, I'm totally open to hearing how I could do this better. How I can be with you better. And then there's all the discernment of, not everybody is clean and not everybody is the right person for you to be teaching. And so it's a matrix, but the reality is at its heart is we're each going to get triggered, but who do I want to be? And how do I want to use that trigger to grow, develop, and flourish rather than make the world wrong?
Wonderful.
Not a clean.
No, it's really good. And I think we happily leave that there. What any parting words for me?
Gosh, I think it's love yourself and trust yourself. And Adam, I just adore you. What a gift you are to all of us. I love what you're doing and bringing into the world.
I think it's an opportunity which I've taken just to share, with all yoga and broaden it out with all different people, right? And it's it's been wonderful to meet people like yourself and other people, and then we can share this with everyone, and I know that people have really, really appreciated conversations like this. And yeah, I think in the ability to show your vulnerability, actually you get stronger, as well, right? And I suppose that's something that I've learned, I guess. that was my parting word, not yours. Well, you did love.
I do love. Turn toward love always, and trust your own inner wisdom on how to get there.
Thank you, Deirdre. And people can find you on I can't remember your website.
dfay.com. dfay.com. Simple.
Yeah.
We have a safe guide, a free safe guide for people if they want that.
Yeah. I've looked at the website. It's really good. There's so much stuff on it. And Becoming Safely Embodied is a wonderful book that I really, really recommend everyone who's listening to read. So thank you again, Deirdre, for coming on.
Total pleasure.